Of course, I started in the subject of ufology, went full circle in it. It led me to the paranormal. So I went into the field of paranormal, parapsychological research, and that led me back round to the ufology. And whatever road I was taking, it was finding my way back to this overall subject of what you refer to like this phenomenology. The only problem is that we got rid of the dividing walls in this subject, because what we were finding in ufology is that all research was lingering because what we weren't looking at as a whole. It wasn't only I found that out actually in 1979, I think it was. There was case files that we had on file, because I took over an organization been running since 1973. So I was looking at case files, early case files, and realizing very quickly that all the documentation about these UFO type cases, I knew they had paranormal disturbances, but none of it was wrote up in the reports. It was only focusing on the UFO stuff. And this started research and realizing back in the 1940s and 50s, they were being completely ignored. They were ignored by Blue Book completely, because the guys that were working on those type of cases looked at the ufology as, well, we can accept the possibility of extraterrestrial life visiting us from a distant other planet. It's feasible. But then when they started looking at the paranormal stuff, they said, oh, we don't want to get into this ghost stuff. Let's just get rid of it. So it was never documented into the cases. But when you start revisiting those cases, you start to find the paranormalities taking place at the times of the UFO encounters and before or even after. And there were massive connections between the two, but they were totally ignored and never put into the case files. So when we started looking back at the old case files, we started finding out, well, hang on a second, there's a lot of paranormal stuff that was connected here. So we decided to start breaking down the walls, because I think once you divide that subject up, you're not going to get a real clear picture of what ufology represents until you start looking at it as a whole. So we started looking at it as a whole. Initially, the Society of Psychical Research were involved with the skull experiments, and we're very aware of what you could say is the extraterrestrial hypothesis being brought into that. Aleister Crowley did exactly the same thing in the 1908, I think. And he went down a particular line of channeling and ended up really being out of his comfort zone. I mean, this thing turned up, which looked like it kicked his butt, to be honest with you. He scared him. He wanted to get out of that, and he did. He changed it straight away there. He didn't want to get into that. He felt like he was not in control. And he said that he did really fear. Now, this is Aleister Crowley, didn't really fear anything, but he felt fear, but that fear was probably induced. There was an induction of fear probably from the process of the incident. However, there was connections in the skull experiment with Blue who turned up, and it wasn't just a photograph, and it wasn't just a video of this entity that appeared. It was big black eyes, typical grey type, but it had this blue hue to it, so they nicknamed it Blue. But there was also references to other entities which were coming in from saying things like they were from distant planets and different stars. They're very similar to what the metaphysical group in Germany did, which was known as, well, people refer it to the Vril Society, but it was actually a metaphysical medium group which were doing the same thing and relaying information to to certain German authorities for advanced technology, processing, so on and so forth. However, the biggest problem for us is that we didn't know if deception was involved, because there's always been deception that's been involved in this. Are we really being told where they're coming from, where they're, and we started looking at statistics. Statistics are so high that you would think, well, okay, they're either coming from 3,000 different locations throughout in space, and there are over 6,000 different types of entities, or telling us one general story. And that general story is, we're extraterrestrials, we come from this planet. Sometimes it's like we're worried about the planet, you're doing this, you're doing that. And it seems to be a general script that seems to be portrayed. The darker side of it is that in the paranormal field, you get exactly the same thing, but people never really put the two together. What we realised with the apportations is that there was an incident that took place during the skull experiment. It's not very well documented, but I'll let you know what went on. Is that they wanted to show the process of apportation. There was an expectation of an object being moved. However, what was told was in a small room, probably the size 12 foot by 8, complete blackout cellar, the people involved, there were 6 people involved, were told, which were all sat around a table on chairs, to switch off all the lighting, switch off all the cameras. This cannot be recorded, it cannot be documented in any visual sense. And sit patiently, waiting for this demonstration. So of course, Robin got up, switched the light off, and they all sat around a table, and they just sat there in silence, waiting. And after several minutes of complete quietness, they thought, well, obviously nothing was happening. So Robin jumped up to go put the light switch on again and realised he couldn't actually find the light switch. And they were looking around, and he had to move in the complete darkness a good 4 foot across the room to catch the switch. He switched it on, and what had actually happened is that the 6 people, the 6 chairs and the table had all been moved and themselves to the other side of the room without no knowledge of the actual incident actually happening.
Wow.
So then there was an open session of communication, and that communication stipulated that, because Robin was really interested, he said, well, how does that happen? How did we not feel it? How's that done? And they explained that there's, on their side, on their reality, they made a blueprint of the location and who was in it. And they relocated that on their side. Therefore, it changed our side. There's kind of this equal and opposing action. So when you change one side, it affects the other. And that is how it was done, unaware, and they were completely unaware because it didn't fit into our reality. Therefore, we were completely oblivious to the actual incident taking place. So that was really interesting. So then we started looking into a bit more about the apports, and what we found is, over the duration of years of research here, is that there's a terminology, a little bit of a terminology problem here regarding manifestations and apportation, because the apportation has to belong to the environment. The manifestation could be an item that's just turned up you do not own, and that gets a little bit, you know, they may both be apportations, but under the heading of how you would term it slightly changes. But what we found is that between 4 to 6 weeks, the apportation, which we know is not the same item, we know now that when you conduct physical analysis on these apports where you can bench test it against a normality. In other words, there's more than one object which are identical. So you must be able to have that bench test mark. That the items look the same, feel the same, but they are nowhere like the same. Under the microscopy, they are completely different. For 4 to 6 weeks, what we were finding, Grant, when we relocate, when we traverse the apportation to a location where there are no disturbances will follow between 4 to 6 weeks and then filter out.
Can you explain that again?
When we relocate the apportation, in other words, we call it it's a hot apportation.
Okay.
4 to 6 weeks. When we relocate that apportation to a location where there are no paranormal disturbances known, it will trigger paranormal disturbances within 4 to 6 weeks.
Wow.
It tends to filter out after that. So what we kind of realize is what's likely happening, because people ask us, what do we do with our apports? Well, we get rid of them. We don't want them. You know, I mean, we might put them into storage someplace for you know, in a shed or something, you know, for 6 weeks or whatever, but then we'll just get rid. You know, because, or you know, we'll conduct further analysis. But we don't introduce them to other environments simply for that reason, because we know disturbances have followed them. So what we think is happening here is that an item is taken and replaced. And what's happening is a quantum entanglement, there's a quantum connection between the realities. And what's happening is that it bridges from the location of the apportation to the phenomena come together. And it seems that the phenomena uses this track to cause disturbances wherever the incident took place, the apportation took place. And you get this cycle of activity. It's known as this particular cycle. We can start the cycle. There are ways of doing it, but it's known as this active cycle. And it's quite hot. After about 6 weeks, don't seem to have much stuff. It seems to die out. It's like short spurts of poltergeist type infestation, what follows the apportations. And they might not necessarily be in an environment. They can follow an individual if they cause traction. In other words, if that individual is somehow affected because of the disturbance, they can follow the individual. It doesn't have to be a haunted environment. It could be a haunted individual, and the apportations will appear, but it's utilizing him as the trap. And what tends to happen is that item remains hot for a certain length of time. Phenomena follows it. So we've relocated some of these apportations into places purposely where we know there's nothing going on, and we get spikes of this poltergeist type activity for short durations of time. Usually we've never seen anything after 6 weeks, should we say. So we do know it's short-lived, like most poltergeist infestations are. They tend to be short-lived. So what we do is we put them into storage. We don't tend to keep them around, because it seems to be, unless we want to encourage phenomena to take place. This was the same thing that's happening for Robin when he had apportations. It was only after a duration of time it seemed that connection was lost. But it would seem there's a connection between wherever this item has come from, which is different than the item it left, and the current environment. This is an interaction that takes place. And I think from what we're looking at is that the apportations might bridge that phenomena from reality to the environment, wherever it is. That's a connecting point. So maybe these connecting points are left around purposely so that it's easy for the phenomena to bridge that from their reality forward to our environment, and it builds this connection in that environment. Sometimes you can build long durations of connections to phenomena taking place more currently, and that's what seems to be taking place. The unfortunate thing is that there isn't much analysis on apportation, simply not because there's not the option to analyze them, but the option is to cross-examine it against something else which is replicable to the item. Luckily for us, we've analysed a few things which were duplicated, like a set of mugs, and one happened to. And the diathermic reactions in them and what we're actually seeing is relevantly exactly the same, really, from the biological traumatology of plants which are affected by UFOs manifesting close to the ground. UFOs have been seen to manifest close to the ground and affect given plant areas. When you look at the effects on those plants, you'll find the diathermic reactions. You'll find the very similar things that we're finding in the results of the apportation of the analysis. It would seem the manifestation of the mug, or the manifestation to the UFO close to the ground, seems to use the same principle of physics when it affects its current field around it. Because it seems what happens is, now we don't know if it's happening on a microscopic scale in people's homes. It could be, because when people talk about portals and things coming through, we envisage something quite large. But what if they were microscopic? What if these tiny little things are happening as well? Exactly the same thing, but microscopic in homes, which when something manifests, something has to be taken from the environment. What people are noticing is during those points is that sudden cold spots. In other words, the heat in that area is removed for something to be replaced with. Something's put there, but the two can't exist in the same space. Something has to be taken. So the heat in that area might be just a pocket, might be removed, and this manifestation takes place. In the same principles of ufology, what we've found in areas where UFOs are manifesting is that if you can get there between 48 and 72 hours, there's a good chance you can measure a gravity well. Because when these seem to appear and manifest, again, something is taken from the environment for that manifestation takes place. And it creates like a little gravity well. We've started finding references from old cases where manifestations of UFOs suddenly appear close to the ground. There might be a road nearby, and cars passing on the road saw this bright object suddenly appear close to the ground, and at night, and it's brilliant lights, and the car headlights are starting to bend towards the object because it creates a gravity well around it. When it creates that gravity well, not even light waves can escape gravity. So what happens is it starts to pull. So what we're actually seeing, and we've measured recently, is certain areas, if you can get there on time, is measure for the gravity wells, measure for an affected area, because when these things are manifesting, and if it's currently happening on a regular basis, that's great. You get to that location, you can conduct certain tests which are measurable, which you can measure for gravitational wells, because what actually happens is on a time displacement meter, and obviously there isn't many of them around, but we have a few, and it measures the differential in time between the meter and the 100 length foot probe. So you cross the anomaly, the suspected anomaly, with the probe and the meter, and you measure the two trends. What happens when you measure those both? That you might get slight differences, microscopic differences. It might be milliseconds, 8 milliseconds, for an example. But we shouldn't have anything. Unless the miniature black holes exist, we shouldn't have anything like that. But we wanted to go one step further. We wanted to find out, is there any other way of detecting this, not just by pieces of equipment, because people are always going to say equipment's faulty, and it's not something that happens every day of the week to bench test it so many times under scientific scrutiny. So what we did is we knew this gravitational well was there still. So we set up a laser track on a tripod, and we put a target out about 100 meters out, and we set up the laser to hit the target in the middle. And what we noticed was that when you're looking at the target, because you don't see the laser strand unless you start spraying it with hairspray so you can see it, but you start to see it wander off the target like this. It's going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And what's happening is the gravity well, where it's this area which we'd be completely unaware of because we don't even feel it really when we're walking through it. But it's so low that it does affect the actual laser, and it pulls on the laser line, which you don't see very well, but it pulls on the laser line like a string of a bow. And as it pulls it backwards and forwards like this, it's wandering off the target backwards and forwards. We're seeing the wobble on the target from the effect of the gravitational well, but it only lasts for about 48 to 72 hours. It's as if the phenomenon manifests and it creates a residue in that area, which is only there for a duration of time. But it is immeasurable, and you can see the effects of this. But it's as if, like, when something suddenly manifests, it's coming from somewhere else. Something else has to replace it. It's like this process. It's swapping round. And what happens is that when they manifest and there's this gravitational well, I think there's literally a bubble around the phenomenon, to be honest with you. What happens is it affects the environment, but it's only short-lived. Some of these objects might manifest in certain given areas as well, such as positive magnetic anomalies. They tend to be the focal place where these are manifesting. And what's really interesting is that because they are positively magnetically, because we always ask, why are they more prominent to appearing and manifesting in these areas known as positive magnetic anomalies? And it would seem that the only things that we can find, I mean, apart from finding correlation between thousands and thousands of very well-known reports of UFO phenomena, cryptids, poltergeist, paranormal disturbances, disappearances as well in these areas, concentrated areas.
Have you seen an apport appear? Because that's one of the things they say, you never see an apport appear. It always happens out of your frame of reference. Is that true?
Well, I haven't ever heard. I've seen one fall in motion, but I never saw the arrival in flight.
Yeah.
There was an occasion, which was an interesting case. It was a poltergeist case in the 1990s we were involved in, and as I was sat with another investigator on the settee of a woman's house where she was having these disturbances, things moving around, we were in conversation, it had been reasonably quiet, and we thought we saw the cushion move on the settee opposite us. And our conversation was completely broke because we thought we saw something move, and we're looking, and we realised, well, maybe we didn't. And as soon as we took our eyes off that cushion, and we looked at each other, it flung itself across the room. Now, maybe the action can't happen when you're observing it. We know that we affect things by observation, don't we? We know that from the dual slit experiments. I wonder if observation affects the incident, you know, and maybe it has to happen without us observing it. It has to be out the corner of your eye, it has to be just over your shoulder. You know, maybe it's down to us. Maybe we're affecting the whole physics of this, that paranormal physics, the paranormal mechanics of it. There is definitely a mechanism at play, because we know when objects are moved, 80% of the time in poltergeist, what people don't realize to measure the displacement effect of objects. Because when you start to see objects being moved, you measure the distance, how much they've moved, you'll start to find reoccurring numbers. That item moved 48.6 inches, that item moved 48.6 inches. There's a mechanism at play. There's definitely maths involved and physics.
Wow.
When you start, there's like a little rule book, you know, and when you actually start looking at cases and you start working out, you can actually do it so well that you can realize if it's a true account you're actually getting, because you start to realize there is this little rule book and a mechanism at play here. But it seems to be always the fact is that this is not like PK. This is not like focusing on an object and have it move. The apportation is always out of sensory, out of sight. I can only say that on an assumption basis that maybe we're affecting that simply by our observation of it.